Hey, CRPN Central, this is Dr. Fox. Please like, comment, subscribe. It helps the mission more than you know so that I can do more for you. Admittedly, this is a brand new setup and I can barely hear myself on the microphone. So there we go. If you can hear me at all, uh, let me know. Let me know what's going on here. Um, oh, I'm hearing text. So I do apologize, everyone. It's a brand new setup. And so as a result, there's some bugs to work out. If you could be patient with me here for a little bit, just for a little bit, we're going to see what we can do. I have actually the LinkedIn Live up on another monitor over here so I can see what's going on. Welcome to CRPN Central. This is TrialSide Chats, the place where we at CRPN Central can come together. We can talk about the challenges in the industry in a safe and confined area, and we can get something done. We can talk about best practices. We can try to figure out how we can do things better. We can help each other. So remember, CRPN is free for sites to join. It's very affordable for sponsors. We want to make sure that you save money and that as a result, you succeed in your clinical trials so we can save as many patient lives as possible. Okay, so let's bring on to the screen here. Welcome to TrialSide Chats. First and foremost, here's the disclaimer. I am not a lawyer. I never claimed I would be one. This is strictly experience. And as a result, please take this experience, ingest it, and make decisions at your own risk. Here's your disclaimer. If you need an attorney, Edie Edens, Eden Law, or Edie Edens, Life Science Law, edlaw.com. She is the attorney to go to. As a result, if you have any questions, talk to Edie. She can help you out. And tell her that Dr. Fox said hi. By continuing on this video, you have acknowledged this disclaimer and that you will listen at your own risk. If you don't agree with this, please turn the video off right now. We don't need the views. We need you to feel safe, secure, and supported. All right, so ground rules for TrialSide Chats. We're going to talk about clinical research, specifically anything clinical research, finance. This is a very, very sensitive subject, and as a result, we have to put some guardrails around it. This must be confidential, everyone, so we're not going to be naming names. We're not going to be naming organizations. We're not going to be pointing fingers. This is only the concepts. If we focus on the concepts, if we focus on the problems, and we identify everyone's perspective, guess what? We can actually figure out how to help each other by understanding our perspective to see how we can all succeed, and we can target those best practices. Okay, any questions? Oh, thank you so much, Jennifer. This is so funny. This is the first time that I've seen it on LinkedIn over here, and it's not on the streaming service. So if you have any questions out there as we're going through this live event, I have the comments right here. I'm happy to go over them, and we can see it over here. So everyone here, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you. So let's go on to the next section. So icebreaker. So the past few weeks, we've had an icebreaker where it was a question. And we ran into a couple of situations this week where I just want everyone to know, make sure that you're reading your contracts and you're working with your regulatory team. Do not forget your IND safety reports. If you are negotiating, if you are working with a regulatory team, if you are processing IND safety reports, odds are in some way, shape, or fashion, if it was negotiated properly, you can get paid for that. Sites, IND safety reports take a lot of time and management. It takes hours to do this and to manage it properly according to all the compliance issues that you have to have. You really need to make sure that your IND safety reports are in every single contract that you negotiate. Now, sponsors are going to try to limit it. Sometimes they say, well, we're only going to pay for IND safety reports in bundles, like every 50 or this big chunks of IND safety reports. Sometimes they say, well, you're only allowed this much money for IND safety reports. Be very careful with that. And remember that this is a service that is provided and that for every time you perform this service, you need to be paid for it. So make sure you get that communication plan in place, administration group, talk to your regulatory group, know about your IND safety reports, and know that you as a site can be paid for them. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out. CRPN is here. We do a lot of IND safety reports. There's a lot of sites out there. They make a pretty good revenue stream out of IND safety reports to support that regulatory team. So big deal, big deal. Don't forget that. And we are going to be covering the book. Here's the book. We're going to go page by page. If you haven't gone through the past few videos, you're going to identify from the book going forward. This is kind of like a book club. If you get the book and you have questions, please feel free to raise the questions during our weekly live series. And if you don't, no worries at all. We're going to cover it little pieces at a time. It's right here. That QR code should send you to Amazon if you'd like to purchase it on Amazon. If you'd like to buy direct from CRPN, it's 10% off and we give you free shipping. All right, so if you have been tuning in for a while now, you know that we have been triangulating many times on the industry. We've been talking about the cycle of a clinical trial. We've been talking about the stakeholders. Today, we're going to really focus in on that site side. And as far as the site side goes, we're going to talk about the 3 pillars of a clinical research site. If you've listened to me talk about this before, it's come up many times. This is how I have created a way to organize the chaos in clinical research finance for sites in 3 primary groups of a clinical research site. We have the administrative site, we have the administrative pillar, we have the regulatory pillar, and we have the operations pillar. Those 3 put together should cover every single thing be running into throughout the trial. And we're going to go over that one pillar at a time. Just as a general summary, we'll go over all of these in more detail. The administrative pillar is just like that. It is responsible for the infrastructure and supporting to ensure that services have what they need to perform those services. The regulatory would be like your compliance arm. This is where you're filing to the IRB. You're trying to figure out how to do everything compliant. You're having oversight over compliance, such as QA and things like that. And finally, operations, that's your patient-facing pillar. That's the one that actually does the services with the patients, procedures, PI, everything like that. So we'll go into that in much more detail. If you have the book, check out page 36. There's a really cool description about the pillars there, and we'll go from there. All right, so we have a comment from LinkedIn user. It says, as a payment specialist, it's so important to make sure that you keep good records. Amen, sister. Amen. Keep it up. I'd love to have a conversation about that. Some INDs can have IND safety reports many times. Payers must have correct numbers. And actually, that's a really good point. So another one of those limitations is only the original IND safety report, not the follow-ups. That's a really good call out. I'm so glad you said that. And on top of that, good records is huge. It's good in finance at all times. What's your very first thing that you ever do when it comes to research finance? Mine, honestly, isn't going to be remitting. It's not going to be negotiating. It's not going to be processing things in CTMS. No. You get a ton of records at all times when it comes to finance. And so my number one rule is every time you get something, as far as records go, you immediately rename that file according to your site's nomenclature. Invent a nomenclature. Is how it may take a month to a couple months, and you're going to start to rapidly retrieve the information that you need all of the time. So thank you so much. That's a really good call out. Okay, so we're going to go into the admin pillar today. So the admin pillar is interesting. It is designed to provide the infrastructure required to successfully perform services. Now, the admin pillar isn't necessarily a service per se according to contract. This group, they don't necessarily see the patients. They don't necessarily identify with patients or even do regulatory submissions, which, by the way, a regulatory submission, according to contract, is a service. You're not only seeing patients, you're not only collecting data as part of the service, you are doing it in a compliant manner. You are agreeing to follow all regulatory compliance. You're ensuring that everything is performed according to law. That compliance is a service. So the admin pillar is the only group that does not include services. However, they are responsible for ensuring that the other pillars that do provide services literally have everything that they need to succeed. Of course, this starts with contracts. They're going to do negotiations and contracts. If you are going to have a clinical trial, you are going to ensure that that contract is negotiated properly, that it's responsible. And of course, you're going to be working with the other pillars to make sure that everything is responsible. But um, you are going to start by a good, strong contract. Once you have a good, strong contract, you also have to ensure that you have the facilities for that contract. You're going to have lease. You're going to have rent. You're going to have utilities. You're going to have licenses and insurance, and making sure that the administration itself is following contract. It's following legal law. It's following regulatory law, local law. You are ensuring that you have the facilities. Let's say you need a freezer. Your administrative pillar is going to order that. Let's say you need a piece of equipment. You're going to order that. Let's say that you have to provide staffing. Well, there's one for you. So HR, finance, accounting, marketing, all of those things that businesses normally have to succeed to ensure that the infrastructure is there, that's the administrative pillar. SOP, development, and only development. Keep in mind that the regulatory pillar, that's the one oversight that it has as far as QA goes. The regulatory pillar is the one that's going to enforce SOP manuals, but as the organization executives, the SOP development and oversight would fall into the admin pillar. And finally, investments. You're going to make procurement decisions. You're going to take out loans. You're going to make sure that, back to what we said, the admin pillar ensures that all other pillars have what they need to successfully perform services. What is not in an admin pillar? Well, they're not going to be participant facing. That's the operations pillar. They're going to see the patients. They're going to ensure the patients have visits performed. They're going to collect data. They also don't perform contract services. So back to what I said, the patient facing and the regulatory facing, those are services performed. The admin pillar doesn't perform those services. And finally, they have compliance submissions. So that would be like the regulatory section. That's not the admin pillar. That's not providing an environment for successful services. That is actually performing the services. So here it is in part of the book. This is on page 38. So the admin pillar itself, it's going to provide executive decisions. We're going to figure out how to run the organization. We're going to make strategic leadership decisions. We're going to hire. We're going to expand. We're going to move, that kind of thing. They're going to do contracts and negotiations. So they are the legal team. They're the ones that are coming and they make sure that the contracts and the budgets are responsible. They're going to do finance and finance analysis. They're going to do the remitting. They're going to do the invoicing. They're going to do the follow-ups. They're going to do business development because, again, in order for a site to succeed, they're going to have opportunities. So that's also where the administrative pillar will help to function. And finally, there's marketing. So marketing is very interesting. Marketing is actually multi-pronged. So you have to market to many, many different people as a research site. You're going to have to market to, of course, sponsors, because you're going to want to get those trials in. And this is the same with business development. They're kind of the two, they mingle with each other, but I wouldn't call them the same. So you're targeting sponsors, you're targeting CROs to get those trial opportunities, but you are also doing business development and marketing to your community. You want to attract physicians because sometimes you might need a specialist. You might need to work with a hospital. You might need to have something for your clinical trial to perform third-party services to as a specialist, things like that. But also you're doing business development and marketing to do outreach to patients. So one of the largest strengths of a research site is their relationships that they have with their communities, doctors, and potential trial candidates, potential patients. So that's the administrative pillar. They are literally creating everything that they need for the other pillars to succeed. Now, you don't see this on the picture. You're going to see that in one of the future TrialSide chats, but over on one side is the operations pillar. That's why you have those little fractions of an arrow there. And then over on the other side is your regulatory pillar. So there's a crosstalk between every single pillar on what they do. For example, the administration to operations pillar, operations being patient facing, they're going to monitor trial progress. They're going to say, hey, how are things going? This would be like the time when you see screen fail reporting, accrual of visits. You're going to really have a good communication pathway so that the administration pillar knows exactly how a trial is going as far as operations go. You're going to identify patient visits. You're going to have a back and forth on reimbursements. So, uh, uh, participant stipends, that's a huge, huge financial administrative burden to cite sometimes. And the distribution of those stipends to the trial participants, which is going to be generally the responsibility of the coordinator who is running the trial, who is seeing a patient, who is therefore in the operations pillar. And then finally, you've got invoices. So invoices are very, very tricky, and that's going to take a lot of back and forth as far as the operations pillar telling the admin pillar what exactly happened so that the admin pillar can send the invoice and send it properly. But then when queries come, so invoices will be sent and then CROs and sponsors will return and they'll say, hey, this invoice was wrong. It was the wrong visit. This was wrong. Maybe something was wrong in a CTMS or a system like that. So the admin pillar is going to have to go directly to the ops team, have a communication plan, maybe who is responsible for that trial, and ask, hey, we got this pushback from this invoice. This is what happened. They said it's not in the EDC. They said this is wrong. This is the wrong visit number, whatever it might be. Can you help us out? So you have to have a direct communication from the admin pillar to the operations pillar throughout the entire course of trial performance. I see a question. Thank you so much again for tuning in. So let's see our questions here. It says, why do some companies require overhead? I have worked with and without overhead, and it's so much better without overhead. I never understood that. So that's a really, really good question. And I would love, it's kind of like a follow-up question. I'd like to know more about this so I could answer it properly. So when you say, why do some companies require overhead? Now, by companies, do you mean research sites? That's the one thing that I'm trying to figure out here. And I think with the second part of the sentence, that's what you mean. So it says, I have worked with and without overhead, and it's so much better without overhead. I never understood that. So the history of overhead is huge, and it's really, really interesting between different sponsors, different agreements. Much of the research industry has branched out of academia. So whenever I started in clinical research and I started looking at the contracts the way they were, I couldn't help but to notice that the indirect cost that they call in like an NIH grant or something like that is pretty much calculated just like overhead as far as the contract goes. And many, many times, the reason why you see that some sites require overhead in their contracts is oftentimes because those sites branched out of first academic institutions. So on one side, they're going to do an NIH grant. And so what they do is they take a direct cost, a base cost, they apply overhead to it, which is supposed to cover like that infrastructure, which is a really, really good point. You may be touching on the administrative and the regulatory pillar for that infrastructure. And then finally, they're going to add it all together. And so you have a direct cost, an indirect cost, and then a total cost. Boy, NIH grants are even worse because not only do you have a direct cost, but you have a secondary percentage called fringe benefit. So now not only are you paying for the institutional facilities, but you're also paying for fringe, which is all of that PTO, insurance, stuff like that for the staff members. So NIH actually not double dips, but they have two different line items, one for the facilities cost and then one for the fringe or the benefits cost. Now, you are absolutely right. There are some sponsors, really large sponsors, who will not disclose an overhead percentage. And they do that because they have their argument is that, well, we just expect the site to handle the infrastructure around it. And then as a result, that should just be part of this entire one single visit. And that makes things so much easier. You are absolutely right. However, from my experience, what happens is when you start delving into fair market value, the overhead itself, which is supposed to pay for things like the administration or the facilities or the rent or the internet, all that stuff that's overhead, it is now being baked into the visit costs. For example, if you have a physical exam and the physical exam, you actually have to pay the doctor $300. But then they say, well, we're going to give you $300 and it has to include overhead. Now you're on the hook to pay the doctor $300 and you still have to make rent. So the reason why many sites require overhead, which unfortunately is necessary now, is the mix between the regulatory activity and the fair market value activity, where everything reported on a budget is actually what's considered the fair price for that value, and the ability to stay afloat, to pay all of the administration and to support the infrastructure behind the performance of that physical exam. So to answer your question in a long way of saying it is, it's so that they can pay for fair market value and infrastructure at the same time. That's generally why they will do that. And then, okay, we have more questions. Look at this. So it says, hi, I have worked in sites that need overhead because research in clinical areas, they work independently and they won't be sharing the budget directly. Yes. So that is also a very good point. There's a lot of things that sites can't necessarily share with all the different areas. Like, let's say they have a contract with a third-party specialist, something like that. Again, this goes back to the fair market value part. It's going to be, you have to have fair market value, and then you have to have facilities and infrastructure on top of that. That's what overhead is meant to be. It's meant to cover all of those undisclosed things that support a clinical research trial. I'm so glad you said that too, because one of the biggest pet peeves that I have is when I go to contract negotiators, and the contract negotiators will sit there and say, oh, well, we expect this regulatory submission to the IRB to be part of your overhead. And I'm thinking, that is not facilities. That's not rent, utilities, things like that. It's an actual service provided with actual personnel and hours. That is not overhead. That's the other thing where people say, and by the way, if you have your invoiceables about 50% of the time, you should be able to require overhead calculations to be on top of your invoiceable items. Administrative time, regulatory time, you have a direct cost, you have an indirect assessment or an overhead assessment, then you have a total. So you should be able to increase your invoiceable items with overhead without compromising fair market value. All right, so let's go over to the administrative side versus regulatory side. So we know that the admin pillar is talking to the ops pillar. We know that they're talking about the trial and the patients and making sure that they have stipends, making sure that they have procurements, making sure that they have everything they need for operations to succeed. The same thing happens with the regulatory pillar. And actually, that relationship between the admin and the regulatory pillar is huge. Most of the time, everyone, the regulatory team is going to have notification of your trial reward, your trial award. In other words, they're going to get the email that says, congratulations, you got the trial. Here's your regulatory packet. Fill it all out. Give me your 1572, these signed CVs, all of these things. Fill it out so we can send this into the IRB. Regulatory pillar is going to be the one that gets that note. And so regulatory pillar, you're going to have to work really closely with the admin pillar. So you let them know that you got a trial award, and you're going to have to be the throttle. You're going to have to tell the CRO, hey, thanks so much. We'll work on this internally, but we can't fill this out to the IRB. We can't submit it to the IRB unless we have a contract and budget. Please have them call our admin pillar so that we can have this negotiated. You are the gatekeeper, regulatory friends. And any admin out there that has a strong relationship with the regulatory team knows exactly what I'm talking about. You can control the submissions to IRB, whether it's your initial submission, whether it's amendments, whether it's something like that. You can control site activation. You can control monitoring visits. And that's a huge, huge thing, regulatory team. You need to be able to talk to your admin team, and you need to sit there and you need to say, hey, we got a monitoring visit. How are we doing on payments? Admin team can come back and say, well, actually, they haven't paid us a dime and it's been 6 months. Regulatory team, you're going to be the ones to sit there and say, hey, CRA, I just talked to my finance team and I'm sorry, but this trial is really, really behind on their bills. So we won't be able to schedule this monitoring visit until we get that caught up. Once we have all of the bills caught up, then we can schedule this. You can do it cordially. You don't have to be mean. But that right there on a regulatory level where you provide access to data as long as you don't compromise patient safety, that is your ability to hold sponsors and CROs accountable for the payments that they are not making to your site. And trust me, everyone, 9 times out of 10, they are not going to be paying you in a compliant way according to contract. So just plan it. So you have to do that with monitoring visits. You can monitor audits. You can do, definitely your closeout visit. Do not schedule a closeout visit until you know that your finance team has a current account on that trial. And finally, invoicing. 35%, everyone. 35. I did not make that up. 35% of a site's revenue is generally a result of invoices. And generally about half of that is going to be regulatory invoices. It's absolutely critical for our regulatory teams to have a strong communication plan with that admin pillar so that you can make sure that you communicate every single dollar that your site has earned so that the admin team can claim it. That's really, really important. All right, let's go on to case studies. If you have any questions about clinical research and you'd like to bring them into CRPN world, we want to make sure that you're comfortable here. We want to make sure that it's anonymous. I'm happy to post a question up here without names, just like you're seeing here. Or if you just want to come on CRPN Central and you want to have a conversation, if you have a voice that you want to share, as long as it's positive and as long as we follow the ground rules, you're more than welcome. You're invited to CRPN, and I'd love to have you. So let's talk about our case studies. The first thing, let's talk. Okay. So why aren't the CROs responding to my questions about payment detail and late invoices? Let's see. I had a payment specialist up here. Okay, my payment specialist friends, have you ever run into this? Do you ever get like a random deposit in your bank and you're like, I have no idea what this is for. It's from some CRO and we have like 10 trials at the CRO. I have no idea. What happens? Where do you go? And so if you do email them and you say, hey, we got this payment, I don't know what it's for, can you help me out here? What happens? Well, I've seen a huge trend just recently, and I mean like in the past month or two, where it's getting harder to do this. You send an email and it's not responded to. A month later, you still don't have an answer. And unfortunately, one of the big problems and big concerns that I have right now is that big CROs are starting to try to literally force payment portals down the site's throat. This is no longer optional. You have to go into our payment portal. You have to go do this. Sites, fight it as much as you can, my friends, because as soon as you jump into that, you are screwed. And I will tell you case study after case study about how CRO has required a payment portal, sites sign up for it, and then one of the employees leave, and you lose complete access to all of your ability to look at your finances. You are in QuickBooks or an accounting software anyway, and so now you just duplicated your efforts, or you've been restricted access to the portal and you're not even allowed to send an invoice. Terrible, terrible case studies, time and time again. Let me tell you, sponsors and CROs, in all sincerity and respect, the ability to control a site's finances through payment portals is unethical, it's inappropriate, and honestly, we got to drop it, guys. And sites, you are the first ones to do it. So I have to really, really hone in on that. So when you say, why aren't the CROs responding to my questions about payment detail and late invoices? It is primarily because, number one, Generally, your requests are going ex-US. As far as the United States go, I send an email and sometimes it's forgotten. Sometimes I get a response at 2 a.m. 2 weeks later. It's going ex-US. It's getting piled up onto these emails. It's being worked very slowly. And if sometime, eventually, you're going to get an answer. That's one. The other one is honestly, they didn't get it. So maybe you should check your email. Sometimes, especially in signed CTAs, you're going to have a payment email for one CRO. And then let's say it's been a year, 2 years, it's a super long trial, 3, 5 years. Uh, Somewhere there's been an email letter that was sent where they decided that they're going to switch CROs from one to the other years later. And that's not in the contract and there's no amendment and it's just some kind of a memo. So now you're going to have to make sure, oh, who said good documentation, good paperwork? Yes. So this is another really cool example because now you better have that letter on file, put it with your contract, make a note on there so that you know what date you need to start sending things to the other email and make the transfer. It's up to you, the site, to have good paperwork and good documentation so you're going to know what emails to send to. And then finally, number 3 on this, honestly, the CROs dropped the ball. And I'm not saying that out of disrespect. I'm saying CROs are super duper busy. They're slammed by sites who are trying to do this, who are trying to ask for help. And so as a result, what do? They're trying to create like a self-serve portal thing where they don't have to answer those emails anymore. That's not the solution, sponsors and CROs. And it's not necessarily an excuse, but I do have an understanding as to why we are running into these situations. All right, so we have a couple other questions here, or a couple other comments. So it said, okay, we have to deep dive into this investigation coupled that with fraud mailed invoices. Yes, yes. So it's getting better and better, and I think they're trying with portals and they're trying to authenticate and doing things like that. But I'm telling you, everyone, even in the age of AI, fraud is really good right now. There's a lot of phishing. There's a lot of crazy things. Most CROs now, it's so funny, they have to bypass technology because technology is becoming so fraudy that when you onboard with a new trial, most CROs now require an in-person phone call. So they have to make sure you're an actual human being. It's funny that we have to bypass technology to protect ourselves from technology now. But yeah, that's one really, really good reason is we got to be very careful of fraud. And there's ways to do that properly and authenticate properly. And then there's ways that actually I would be willing to bet that people who like force sites into portals and things like that, they don't read their CTAs because I think that they're overstepping their legal rights. And that's another thing that we can talk about later. And so yes, payment platforms have been a game changer. Yes, we got to be real careful with that. I don't trust them anymore. I used to love the payment portals, but after I've seen so many sites get burned out of them, I just don't deal with it. So we got to be real. You got to watch yourself sites. You got to be really, really careful with that. You as an independent contractor, you really need to be careful with that. All right, so let's talk about this other case study. So CROs keep limiting my admin fees to ridiculously low rates. This may come back, Jennifer, to what we were talking about with overhead. How in the world can I do research when they starve the process? Okay, so we talked about the overhead. I don't want to go into that too much more, but this is more of, I believe, a negotiation question. This is CROs keep limiting my admin fees to ridiculously low rates. Yes. So let's talk about that first. Generally, what happens if you are in the middle of a negotiation, it's going to be, hey, I love these things. So I've never seen fees like this before in my life. No other sites are referencing this to me. It's always very much, you're going to try to bring, so the sponsor and CRO during a negotiation, they're going to try to bring your site down to the level of the other sites they claim they work with. But when you start talking with other sites, generally what happens is they say the same exact thing to every single site. So the negotiators are trying to pin the sites against each other as far as like a bidding war, I guess is what it would be. So as a result, they get the best price, and so it doesn't pay the bills. We'll just be honest. I won't even let you know how much uh, document storage, for example, for over 25 to 30 years actually costs versus what sponsors and CROs force on sites. So that's one thing to consider is I am fully aware that the really, really super low fair market value rates on many of these invoiceable line items, there's no way they are fair market value because honestly, they don't even pay the bills after validation. It just doesn't happen. So that's the first thing to accept. So I do know for a fact that as an industry standard, we have ridiculously low limits on some of our invoiceable items, and that sites will unfortunately have to eat those costs because if they actually try to get what is the cost is, the actual cost, sponsors and CROs will not work with them. So that's the first thing. Let's acknowledge that. How in the world can I do research when they starve the process? And I recognize that is the feeling. So I've been there. I've been in a negotiation to where it's like, look, I literally have the invoice quote right here in front of me for exactly what you are asking for. And it is 5 times what you tell me your best and final offer is. You are asking me to eat the costs for services performed for your trial. Oh, I don't care. All the other sites are accepting this. It doesn't matter. They don't care about what the actual cost is. They care about what everyone else is accepting. And then you go back and forth. You can have this fight all you want. You can do it a couple times for fun, but it gets old. So what ends up happening is you're saying, well, show me the validation. I have evidence here that says otherwise. I know this is the cost. Well, maybe your site is just too expensive. Maybe your operations are too inefficient, whatever. But what it is you do that a couple times and you finally realize you're wasting your time because you're talking to a brick wall. How in the world can I do research when they starve the process? There's a number of things that you can do to ensure that your trial is fully funded at all times. One of my favorite processes is multivariate negotiation, hands down. So it's always going to be, hey, we really need this much. I know this is what it's going to cost, but they're not going to pay it. So maybe we can try to increase the rates and this other thing over here so that this, I know we're going to get a little bit more money here, but it'll normalize and it'll cost shift over to make sure that we can make the bills are paid over on this one. You can do that across a series of your visits, your invoices, or your overhead. In those three, those are your big adjustments. So and even provisions. So I'll add a fourth one in there, provisions. So provisions are really cool because if you have a risky provision, such as like a quarterly payment versus a monthly payment, you can say, well, we can accept the quarterly payment, but it's going to apply additional risk. So the overhead is going to go up. So we're going to have a higher rate per value every time we go, which by the way, Jennifer, that's the other cool reason for overhead. I know it's really annoying on like the budgeting side and calculating side, but from a negotiating side, it allows you to normalize the ability to get the rates that you need. Then you go into invoicing. So as far as invoicing goes, you can sit there and be like, okay, well, I know we're not going to get a lot for this admin pillar, but they'll pay for the regulatory pillar. So we can make sure that what they can pay for will neutralize all of the costs that we're going to have to eat that they're not going to pay for. So cost shifting is a thing. Hospitals have done it all the time. The age of the $300 aspirin. So when certain things have to be a write-off or have to be a loss or the consumer absolutely will not pay for it, you'll just make up for it in other areas. That's the best option that I can think of when it comes to this certain case study. All right, so if you're first time tuning in, I've had this up a couple of times, and I'm not going to let the secrets go yet. I want to see if my CRPN community out there can figure out what is missing here. If you want to figure it out, if you want to send me a message, if you want to send comments on the negotiation path, let me know what you would add to this list of invoices so that we can try to figure out how to, just as I was saying, normalize. I guess one of the first questions that I could say is, What do you think is costing that is not on the list of invoices? Is this comprehensive? Do you think, take a look at this. In a cardiovascular heart failure study, estimated 3 years, there was a 65% screen fail rate percentage, and with an enrollment goal of 7. Do you really think that study startup at 3,000, study close at 1,000, and document archiving at 500 is going to pay the bills? So I keep this up, and just so you all know, this is the third time I brought this up, and every time we're going to go through here, we're going to look at maybe a couple more hints on what might need to be added on here. And we had a really, really cool clue last time, the last series, the last 3 podcasts before this, and what we started now. And so I'm going to leave it at that. Please also note that I am going to the Manasa Summit in April in Chicago, Illinois, and I have been honored and asked to provide an entire presentation on how to take a budget just like this, study, you get 3 invoiceables and that's it, and how to expand that into a responsible budget that can properly pay the bills so that our clinical research sites have everything that they need to properly perform research. So thank you so much for everyone who tuned in today. Excellent questions. If you have any follow-up questions at all, please feel free to reach out to me. Send me a LinkedIn message. Let me know what you think. If you'd like to join CRPN, well, there's the website, there's the LinkedIn profile, there's the YouTube channel. Please feel free to connect, like, subscribe, support the mission, support what we do so that we can educate our clinical research sites and our industry, so we can be aware of the needs and so we can properly support each other. So without further ado, I don't see any more comments on here. This is Dr. Fox. Please like, comment, subscribe, share your voice. See you next time.